Welcome to this tutorial for the Honda Jet in MSFS. This tutorial is from a runway start with engines on. A cold and dark start tutorial will follow at a later date. We've already planned our flight in the MSFS world map. A tutorial for how to do this is linked in the description below. The airplane has the default avionics suite, so you'll be able to follow along if you just bought this from a PC or Xbox Marketplace. A PC only tutorial with the working title avionics suite will follow at a later date if there's demand for it. With that out of the way, let's fly. When the plane loads in, it runs through some self-tests. Don't worry about the yellow warning message, it's just telling you that the default nav data in MSFS is slightly out of date. Press the bottom right soft key on the center screen and you'll see that our flight plan, which we plan in the world map, is displayed on the GPS. Head down to the control panel below the MFDs and click Go to Initialization. We now have a few tasks to perform before flight. Go to System Tests and click Pre-Flight. The plane will run through some fire alarm tests, some stall warning tests, and some light bulb tests. As these tests complete, they're recorded as done on the control panels below the MFD. Once they're all done, click back to return to the initialization screen. The next step is the weight and fuel configuration. On each page of this, we can click Get from Sim, and the values from a simulator will be inserted into the flight computer. When it's all done, click Next. These speeds are configured the same way. Click Get from Simulator on the takeoff and landing pages and set them to display on the PFD. With those done, click back and you'll see that our pre-flight initialization is complete. Heading back up to the main panel, hit the B hotkey to set our altimeter to the correct local pressure. Also pop up the ATC menu to check your initial clearance altitude. For us, it's 11,000 feet. So this is what we'll set as our initial climb altitude in the autopilot. Heading over to the autopilot panel, we dial in 11,000 feet as our initial altitude. We now activate nav mode and the airplane will follow the flight plan that we created in our world map that's now displayed in our GPS. We want to climb to our initial altitude, so we hit flight level change mode and we'll now need to set a desired speed for that, so we'll set 250 knots. With that, we're almost ready to go. From a runway start, flaps are configured correctly for takeoff and spoilers are set to retracted, which is the correct position. We'll release the parking brake. You can either use your joystick hotkey or the button on the pedestal. Before takeoff, we'll quickly flick on the yaw damper and we're now ready to go. Bring both engines up to takeoff power and the plane will start its takeoff roll. Rotate at the V-speed shown on your PFD. For us, that was about 115 knots. The plane really likes to climb, so initially you'll probably find yourself slightly above the FD, but don't worry about that, just retract the landing gear once you have positive rate, and flick on the autopilot once you're above 400 feet. The plane will then level off and start to follow its climb profile and your flight plan. As the plane begins its climb, you can retract the flaps and keep the throttles at full power. This plane doesn't have an auto throttle, so flight level change mode is essentially a pitch mode. It will pitch the nose up and down to maintain your desired airspeed on its way to your desired altitude. Once you're above 5,000 feet, push the button above the PFD to set your atmospheric pressure to standard. As your climb continues, you'll probably be cleared to higher altitudes, so just increase the desired altitude using the altitude select button, and the plane will continue to climb to your new altitude. Towards the end of our climb, we're cleared up to our cruising altitude of 32,000 feet. As we reach 32,000 feet, the plane switches from flight level change mode to altitude hold mode. Once we've leveled off, we'll move the throttles back slightly to the max climb thrust detent, and we'll hit the cruise speed control on the autopilot panel. Although the plane does not have an auto throttle, this mode will vary the N1 by plus or minus 5% to maintain our desired airspeed. It's a really clever feature and means you can relax during the cruise phase. A quick note here about vertical navigation in the default plane. If you're on PC, you can download the working title Garmin G3000 package, which adds functional VNav to this aircraft. But in the default version of the plane, which we're flying here, the VNav guidance is advisory only and based on the default MSFS logic, which is a bit dodgy. So if, like me, you've just bought this plane and you're flying the default version, your best bet is to follow the MSFS ATC for vertical guidance in flight change mode. While we're at cruise, we'll take the opportunity to flick through some of the options available to us on the MFD. There are traffic and weather radars, as well as a direct to function where you can enter a waypoint for the aircraft to head straight towards from your present position. You can also view your entire flight plan, scroll through it, and also head direct to any of the waypoints in that list. The procedures menu allows you to configure departures and approaches if you haven't already done so in the world map. And there's also an option to load charts onto the MFD, which I believe works with a Navigraph subscription. You can also view a list of your nearest airports and waypoints, and you have the option to display those on the map or head straight towards them. We'll switch back to the map and continue our flight. At top of descent, as directed by the ATC, we'll dial in the altitude they've given us. This is initially a step descent to 25,000 feet. And once that's dialed in, we can put the aircraft in flight level change mode. It will pitch the nose down and start to descend. We'll set the throttles here to about 55%. You can check the value on the engine display on the center MFD. It's possible at some points you may level off during your step descents. As you level off, just adjust the throttle as required to maintain your current airspeed. Then when you're given your next descent, as before, dial in the new altitude, hit flight level change mode and bring those throttles back to 55%. As we get closer to our destination, we continue to follow the ATC's directions for step descents, keeping our speed as close to 250 knots as possible. This is a good time to dial in the ILS frequency of our destination airport, so we'll head over to the audio and radios option, click the nav1 frequency, dial in the frequency of the ILS, and then hit transfer to set it as the primary nav frequency. Another useful feature at this point is to be able to zoom in and out of your map on the MFD. This is achieved by using the button on the control panel just below the center MFD. As we begin our final few turns, we'll bring the throttles back to idle to bring our speed closer to our approach speed, which will be marked with a tag on the PFD. We'll also drop the landing gear ready for our approach. We can also safely configure the flaps to full position for landing here. As we level off around our bottom of descent, we'll increase our throttle to maintain our approach speed. We'll also change our nav source to Localiser and hit the approach key on the autopilot panel. The plane will now turn to follow the Localiser at our destination airport, and it will also start to descend on the glide slope as soon as it intercepts it. When the plane acquires the glide slope annunciator will light in green on the PFD, and the plane will start to descend on the slope. As you descend on the glide slope, manage your throttle to maintain your approach speed. Make sure your landing gear is down, your flaps are full, and you're ready for landing. I keep the autopilot engaged until minimums of about 150 feet above sea level. Then disengage, continuing to follow the glide slope. Then just before touchdown, idle the throttles, start to flare, and glide down onto the runway. There's a slight crosswind here which takes us slightly left of the centerline, but we touch down smoothly, pitch the nose forwards, apply brakes, bring her back towards the centerline and roll to a stop. And that concludes our flight tutorial in the HondaJet for MSFS. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please drop a like and feel free to subscribe as I make this kind of content fairly regularly. Take care and I'll see you next time.